here with Eddie McNamara, author of the book Zodiacally, the real story of a fake serial killer. Thanks for joining me, Eddie. Go ahead and tell me a little bit about your book, Zodiacally.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be doing this. So I wrote a book about the Zodiac case, but really it's about what we know about the Zodiac case from the media, say the Fincher film and the Robert Graysmith book and sort of the Netflix documentaries. And I did a deep dive of real research into the police files, into court records, into statements that police officers and people involved have made over the years. And I contrasted the sort of urban legend of the Zodiac, which is presented in the movies and sort of in true crime, with the actual facts of the case and what was happening at the time and what the police officers believe. And it doesn't line up, sorry, I guess this is a spoiler, but it doesn't line up at all. The story of the Zodiac is a very good story. It's a very sellable story. It's a great urban legend. It's just not based in reality.
Yeah, that is something that I noticed right away. How long did you work on this book, or how long ago were you getting into the Zodiac stuff?
I'd say I started in 2021, but that was like half on, half off. I had a novel, I had a short story collection, and then I spent 3 years after that full-time researching this and full-time writing it. And so about 3 years full-time, 5 years total.
Okay.
And it's just, I kept finding stranger and stranger facts about people involved in this case. And it's the Fincher film is about people who are obsessed with the Zodiac. And I can relate to that because I think it sort of, took over my life for at least, 3 to 5 years, and still I'm like answering emails all day. Before we did this podcast, I was fielding emails, both positive and negative. I don't see it leaving anytime soon.
Yeah. Have you noticed any, anyone favoring more positive or negative attention for the book since it's come out?
Yeah, I've been getting a lot of really good reviews. So the reviews up on Amazon are really good. And a lot of people read the book and, people who are into Zodiac but don't have a Zodiac business. So someone who's maybe, sort of been researching the case for a number of years, that type of person will be like, you did great research in the book. They don't have to agree with me about everything, but they'll be like, some of these things were right in front of our face this whole time and you pointed it out. And I've gotten a lot of responses like that, both in email and in reviews from longtime Zodiac researchers. But someone who's selling Zodiac, someone who has a web page about Zodiac, or someone who has a Zodiac podcast or a documentary about their grandfather as a suspect, they don't like this book because why would they? It's a fact check on their grift.
I can see that. Yeah, I've got a copy of your book right here. I'll go ahead and plug that. I'm about halfway through. I haven't finished it yet, but man, I've been burning through this thing. As soon as it showed up, I was like, this is my focus. I put whatever book I was reading on pause, and I was like, this is what I wanted when I first got into the Zodiac, because it was probably about 3 years ago for me, and it was kind of like I'm off and on into true crime, you know what I mean? Right. Some of it's good, some of it's whatever. And when I first heard the story, I heard the straightforward thing, and I was like, okay, there's got to be more to this. And I just kept running into kind of like what you described as grifts. And it's like, yeah, people like, my dad's a Zodiac, and all this shit. So eventually I kind of got off of it. And this is exactly what I was wanting. Something that's more factual. That's because I don't know if you agree, the original story, it feels like they start off with the Zodiac did all these things. You don't need to know why we think this, kind of. It's just, It is what it is.
Because the newspaper said so. Because he wrote a letter to the newspaper and said he did this. And now we believe this serial killer / crank letter writer. So it's, and it's that whole thing that I begin the book with, the whole print the legend. So once the story is out there, no matter how fantastical it is, the story is what people remember, not the retraction. I go into, in the first chapter, numerous stories of the 1960s, like the burning bra and, the Kitty Genovese true crime case that, supposedly 37 of her neighbors looked away as she was being murdered. But, they actually came out and helped. They sat with her as she bled out. They chased the perpetrator away. It was a failure of the ambulance system. It took an hour to get there when she died. So the real story is that. But the sensationalist story that the New York Times posted it was in psychology textbooks textbooks into the 2000s, calling it the bystander effect, where when there's a lot of people, it diffuses your responsibility and you don't help out. So it's like a fake psychology term that came because of this story, which is just a story. No other papers reported on it because they knew it was fake, but they didn't call out the Times for it. And the same thing is, my wife is a journalist. She used to work with the woman, Lindsay Van Gelder, who wrote the story, The Burning Bra Story. And the story is not about a burning bra. That's what her editor put on as the title of the story. The story is about women protesting Miss America in like 1967, and it has nothing to do with bra burning. The story never mentions bra burning, but the editors at the New York Post created a myth by sticking that title on it, and people will swear that they were at a protest where women were burning their bras now. And it's just, it's not factual. And I think we'd run into a lot of the same things with this Zodiac case, where you read it in the paper, you see the mysterious ciphers in the paper. In the 60s and 70s, a lot of Bay Area unsolved cases were being linked to it, and people just believed it.
Yeah, and it plays out like a comic book, like the Zodiac story. It sounds like a 1960s noir comic book where you have this cop chasing this guy who's just taunting them and they can't catch him. And honestly, I wanted to believe that too, because I was like, this is like the craziest thing I've ever read. But it just felt like the more that I was like trying to find the in-between pieces where it just is what it is sort of response to that.
It's a really great story, and the film version made $100 million at the box office.
Yeah.
So, and every bit of entertainment from then, a serial killer entertainment, let's say a show like Criminal Minds, or lots of movies like even like Psycho Killer, they have the cat and mouse game, and they have like the spooky, the Riddler in the most recent Batman is based on the Zodiac. It's become a trope. So it's art imitating art, I guess, because the letters are, it's a comic book supervillain, this Zodiac, which is very compelling. I mean, comic book properties have made billions, so it's something that people are very interested in. And the person writing these letters struck on something that has lasted 56 years, because there's still articles in the newspaper, like there's some clown out there right now saying that the Black Dahlia Avenger and the Zodiac Killer were the same person, and he figured it out in a code. That's complete BS. Like, the Black Dahlia was 20 years before Zodiac. The first Zodiac victim said the guy was like 25 to 30 years old, so this dude would have been like 9 when he was killing the Black Dahlia. So it's it's absurd. But it's still making somebody money. They're still making Netflix documentaries about Arthur Lee Allen, and there's still money to be made on this story. But again, like, I really go deep dive into the records and into the reports and into what the cops knew, and it's certainly not what we believe in the popular culture true crime version of Zodiac is.
Yeah, and speaking of like some of the people involved, let's go ahead and talk about Dave Toschi, and then we'll circle back to the beginning. Go ahead and tell me Dave Toschi's involvement in the Zodiac. Like, when did he jump into the case? Because I know it started in the 60s, like late 68.
Yeah.
And then Toschi got involved in,
Toschi got involved October 11th of 1969. Okay. That's when Paul Stein, a cab driver, was murdered in San Francisco. And Toschi was a homicide detective in San Francisco. He had a partner, William Armstrong, and they caught the case, and they initially believed it to be a cab robbery. So he was a detective on that, and they thought it was a cab robbery. But then, 2 days later, the newspaper gets a piece of the cab driver's shirt with a letter. This is the Zodiac speaking. I killed that cab driver, and blah, blah, blah. So now the Zodiac is in San Francisco, because previous to this, there were 3 Zodiac attacks. 1 happened in Napa, and 2 happened in Solano County, in the Vallejo area. So, it gets to the big city. Now it starts getting big city press. Now the Zodiac is there. And I think the most interesting thing about Toschi, and the thing that I cannot unsee, that really sort of got me interested in investigating this case in a serious way, is in over 1,200 pages of FBI files about the Zodiac case, there's only one person named as a definitive Zodiac letter writer, and it's the lead investigator on the case, Dave Toschi. There are 3 FBI memos that name Dave Toschi as a Zodiac letter hoaxer to get publicity. And when the guy in charge of catching Zodiac is pretending to be Zodiac, there's something there, and I had to figure out what it was. And to be honest, every single Zodiac expert or person interested who has done serious research and looked at the FBI files has had to confront this. And apart from me, and I don't know who else, they look away from it. It's inconvenient for the story. You can't sell Zodiac when you're a detective has written, he's accused of writing 3, and his chief asked the FBI to examine the handwriting to see if he wrote them all. It's something you have to purposefully ignore in order to sell your Zodiac story, to some extent.
I mean, that was one thing, like when I was reading about that, when I got to that part in the book, it just completely reframed the way I was looking at the whole thing. And it made me think back to like the Fincher movie, because I feel like they briefly touch on it, but then they just kind of like immediately swerve away and they're like, back to the story.
It's really interesting how Fincher dealt with it, because, Toschi, the Mark Ruffalo character, is the hero of Fincher's movie, and Graysmith, the author of the book, they're the hero of the movie. And it turns out that in 1978, in the letter, when the letter's brought up, Internal Affairs speaks to Toschi. Now, in real life, Internal Affairs took Toschi in, they interviewed him, they investigated him as a Zodiac letter hoaxer, and they also asked him his whereabouts during the Paul Stein murder. They asked him about the letters. So he was getting hammered, and he was taken off of the homicide detail. He's the top homicide detective in San Francisco. He's the inspiration for Dirty Harry. He's the inspiration for Steve McQueen's Bullet. The guy was a big shot, and they sent him to a punishment assignment in pawn shops in real life, where he had to match stolen items with pawn shop tickets. It was a public, embarrassing thing that his chief did to him because he was involved in this letter fiasco, and the department actually, and it's a police department, so it's an internal investigation, so of course they found him not guilty of writing the letter, but then the chief goes right to the FBI and he's like, all right, so Toschi did 3, can you see if he did? And he has a whole list of them from when the case got to San Francisco to the end, and the FBI said it's inconclusive that the same person wrote all these letters. So the FBI is not even saying that the letters are all from, it's a separate California document examiner who verified the letters, and I have a lot of issues with that because some of them have been fakes and have been shown to be fakes over the years. So when the FBI was asked to do it, they were just like, just get out of here with this mess. They were like, it's inconclusive. Somebody it might be the same person, but like, we're not gonna risk our reputation with this mess of a case that you guys have with your own inspector writing letters. So the FBI kind of backed off, and that's not really FBI-ish to back off, but they did.
No, yeah, that was something that really stuck out to me, where I was like, man, this seems like something you would have to focus on if you're going to do Zodiac stuff, like, or any kind of Zodiac story. Like, to jump over that just seems crazy to me.
I mean, it's the headline for me of the whole thing. The most shocking and most sort of interesting thing is Toschi is named in the FBI files as a letter writer. You can't look past that. But I think there's something equally wild, is that the first 2 murders that happened at Lake Herman Road, the original detectives from Solano County Sheriff's Office and Vallejo Police Department, as well as the 1991 cold case detectives who worked the cold case for Vallejo, have all spent decades, the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, doing media appearances saying that, we don't believe that the Lake Herman Road murders have anything to do with Zodiac. We believe some local guys did those murders, and maybe Zodiac was inspired by it, but we don't think the first 2 were Zodiac at all. And this Zodiac case hinges on the Zodiac knowing information about those murders that the police don't even think are Zodiac murders. So the entire foundation of the case, and I cite it in the book. There's like 150 citations in the book, and I quote these guys all over the book from their media appearances. The original investigators are very much against the idea of the first 2 murders Zodiac took credit for even being Zodiac murders. And this is another very inconvenient thing, because in the letters, Zodiac supposedly proves that he knows information that only the killer and the police would know. But if these are not done, if the police are satisfied, and they say satisfied, the cold case detectives were satisfied he didn't do it, and these other local drug dealers did it. If they're satisfied that that's not Zodiac, then it's information that, it's irrelevant to the case. So now somebody knows some police information, and maybe you should look at that for your Zodiac murders.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, when you zoom out of the 4 crimes that are, that people really connect with it too, they just kind of seem like random crimes. Like, other than the letters and the phone call or whatever, it's like there's no connective tissue there. It just sounds like somebody saying like, I did all these things.
Well, that's exactly what it is. And there's only one handwriting expert who verifies these letters. There's actually no fingerprints between crime scenes. So there's 4 crime scenes, 5 murders, and there's no fingerprint that exists in multiple crime scenes. There's also no fingerprint. There's no no matching fingerprint between the 20-something letters associated with the Zodiac and any of the crime scenes. Also, the guns used every time were different. The eyewitness descriptions of the man who did this were very different. The first surviving victim, Michael Mageau, described the shooter as someone between 25 and 30 years old, short, around 200 pounds with curly blonde hair. The second surviving victim, Brian Hartnell, who was stabbed, again, it's a different MO. This is stabbing, the guy's wearing a costume, he's wearing a mask, the famous Zodiac mask. He ties 2 kids up and talks to them for 15 minutes. The other ones were blitz attacks. It's completely different. And he describes the guy as being between 225 and 250 pounds with long brown hair that poked through the mask. That was that long. The next case is in San Francisco. The eyewitnesses in the aftermath of the Paul Stein murder, they didn't actually witness the murder or even hear a gunshot, but they saw the aftermath. And they described the man as a man in his 40s with a crew cut, kind of heavy set with, like a maybe reddish hair or something like that. This guy's now 15 years older and 55 pounds lighter than one of the other ones. Like, I was a cop for 7 years, and descriptions, same race descriptions are not this, there's not this much variance. Like, if you're describing someone, you might be off plus or minus 10 pounds, plus or minus, 5 to 10 years, 1 or 2 inches in height, but not, this is a wide variance of, he could be 250 or 185 or 45 years old. It's all over the place.
Yeah. Going back to the first confirmed kills, the Lake Herman Road, could you tell me, like, you described that as a drug dealer killing?
Yeah.
And in the book, you mentioned like a thrill kill. So, could you explain that?
Sure. So that happened in December of '68. That happened, there were no letters about that. There was no connection to Zodiac about that. The police were they couldn't figure out what happened. It was almost like they had an old-time sort of sheriff's department. It's almost like the movie No Country for Old Men.
Yeah.
And the lead investigator is very much a Tommy Lee Jones in this. And he kind of doesn't know what the hell's happening. He's like, maybe it's a maniac. I don't know. And the cops in Vallejo started getting information from drug arrests they were making that a local drug dealer named David McGrath had something to do with the Lake Herman Road murders. And this name came up a bunch of times. He's a Vallejo drug dealer. A month before the second confirmed Zodiac murders, Dave McGrath is arrested for a thrill kill spree where him and his friends on his 21st birthday go out, they go to a strip club, they get drunk, they do some drugs, they go to a gas station, they rob the place of $20, shoot the gas station attendant in the head. They go to another gas station, kidnap the attendant, drive him out to Blue Rock Springs where the Zodiac attack happens a month later. And they tell the guy, all right, listen, you can leave, get out of the car, just, run for it. We're not gonna hurt you. And he runs out of the car and they shoot him in the back 5 times. It comes out that Dave McGrath's gun used in that murder was used in a murder in January of 1970, another thrill kill. A man named Matthew Burrell was celebrating his birthday. He's a 46-year-old black man. He's celebrating his birthday. He's in a car parking lot and he's shot from behind with an M1 carbine, which was Dave's gun. There's no reason for it. It's just a straight up thrill kill. But this being a black man in the 1960s, it's not getting the press coverage of these other, sort of white teenager murders, these Zodiac murders, which is unfortunate. And then Dave McGrath, he ends up on death row, and one of his cohorts gets involved in 3 gun crimes and tells the Vallejo police, Dave McGrath did the Lake Herman Road murders. It's not Zodiac. And then McGrath speaks to a sergeant from Solano County and tells him the whole story, but puts himself as a passenger in the car and says that someone else did it. But he says what the kids are wearing, how the murders went down. He seems very credible to the sergeant who was investigating this. And he says that the gun they used, the .22, was thrown in the bay. And the sergeant brings this to his boss, who is like the No Country for Old Men guy. And he's basically like, this guy's already on death row, no gun, we can't take it to trial for this. And they sort of drop it in 1970. It makes the paper twice in 1970. Not the front page. It says that there's new suspects in the Lake Herman Road murders, and they say that like a motorcycle gang member has testified against someone, and then there's a confession, but the gun isn't there, so they're still working on it. And that's the true story of what happened, which is page 34. and not David Fincher's movie.
Yeah.
David Fincher cuts this whole thing out of the movie. He had very competent researchers working on his team for the movie. So the Lake Herman Road murder is never addressed in his movie because Fincher is actually talking with these detectives in a book in 2000, in the early 2000s, and Fincher is like McGrath and his partner. They're psychopaths. They let this guy, run and then shoot him in the back. And that's how Betty Lou Jensen, the first Zodiac confirmed murderer at Lake Herman Road, was also killed. She's running from a car, shot in the back 5 times. He thinks, this is probably inspiration for Arthur Lee Allen. And he uses the names, McGrath and his partner are psychopaths. And so, Fincher is aware of this in the early 2000s. He knows this aspect of the case. The cold case detectives are telling him this isn't Zodiac. This is, this is some other local guys. So, again, the lore, in order to make it work, he has to keep it in the movie as something that's in the letter, but not avoid completely that there's a whole side investigation going on into the real killers here. And he's certainly aware of it because he uses the guy's name, and I quote that in the book.
Yeah, it's very pick and choosy of what you want to include into the narrative there as far as the Zodiac story goes, which is, it's always really interesting to see what type of stuff they leave out there. And
yeah, I mean, and he did, he did a great job in replicating the sort of the crime scenes. He's a fantastic filmmaker. He told a great story. I love the film. It's just, you do have to pick and choose. There's 1,200 pages of FBI reports. There's hundreds of pages of police files. There's when he made the movie, there's probably 40 years of people talking on talk shows about the case. So he does have to pick and choose. You do leave out the one that you think might not be Zodiac, you do leave that one out of the case. But, they've all said it. They've come out and said it. These original detectives, they were on these tabloid shows in the 90s, like the Phil Donahue show and the Geraldo Rivera and, Unsolved Mysteries. And they're like, it's not Zodiac, but some other guys did it. And, nobody wants to listen. It's, I guess we hear what we want to hear, but they tried to go public with it. It just never succeeded. The narrative sort of superseded the truth.
And that is, that one's only attached. Is that because the letter that just said, I killed those kids last year? Is that the one?
And then he gave some very specific information that's straight out of the police reports about how the kids were laying. He uses cardinal directions like a cop would, and he says what type of ammunition, how many shots were fired, which is a weird thing for a killer to say about how many shots were fired. If you collected the bullets, you would know, if you were looking at a report, they collect all the bullets and there's just many rounds fired. So he gave specific information that was in the police report, but not necessarily visceral information that a killer would know. When he talks about the second murder, the murder of Darlene Ferrin, where he shot Mike Mageau and Darlene Ferrin, that's the one from the film with the hurdy-gurdy man, where a car pulls up in the lover's lane and just starts blitzing the people in the car. He gives much more visceral information, like he was really there, about how Michael jumped into the back seat, which he did, and how he even gets something wrong in the Zodiac letter. He said that he shot the boy in the knee, and he didn't shoot him. It wasn't quite the knee, so it's not from the report. It's more that the guy doing it is likely the one who wrote the letter, because his impression was that he shot the person in the knee and then he jumped into the back seat. But that's actually factually incorrect, but viscerally, and I buy it. I buy that this person really did that murder. But the other one, just the facts. It's right out of the report, like he's copying it.
Yeah. So do you think Toschi had anything to do with the early letter writing then, before he was involved with the Paul Stein stuff? Or do you think no?
I don't. I think he was, if anything, an opportunist, and he certainly made the most of Zodiac. He maximized the Zodiac case for publicity for himself. He also, I discovered, and I read some of it in a book called Motor Spirit from Jared Kobeck, which is a fantastic book. And then I did some research of my own. I found some more instances of Dave Toschi writing letters. There was a columnist, Guy Wright, who worked for the Chronicle, San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner. They were owned by the same company. And throughout the 70s, there's these very strange columns from Guy Wright about Toschi hero stories. And there's a bunch of them all throughout the 70s. And one of them is randomly, Toschi, the city's top homicide detective randomly goes to a hotel room, knocks on a door, and tells a 17-year-old girl that, her sister is arrested in some other state because they killed the Iranian general's son, right? And that's weird. Like, why would a San Francisco homicide detective knock on a hotel door to tell somebody about an Iranian general's son? And there's never been in the history of the United States an Iranian general's son murdered. So that's weird on its face. And then a week later, the girl writes a letter to the paper on Christmas Eve thanking Toschi for helping her, which is really weird. And then a week after that, 3 to 5 San Franciscans who are not in the city directory, which is, again, odd, write letters praising Dave Toschi for being the city's super cop. And in a city full of psychiatrists and liberals, at least we have Dave Toschi out there. And what a great guy, Dave. And so this happens, like, this is just one absurd example of Dave Toschi fan fiction about himself. He does this throughout the 70s. There was a columnist named Amistad Mopin who wrote a column called Tales in the City. He included Dave Toschi in a column. He then got a bunch of letters from college women and young women talking about how, wow, we love Inspector Toschi. Put him in your column more. And this writer, Mopin, he saw the latest Zodiac letter in 78 and said, wait a minute, I know who wrote this. And he went and got his letters, his fan letters, and he said, Toschi wrote these fan letters. I think Toschi wrote the latest Zodiac letter. He went to the San Francisco police's head of intelligence, a guy named John O'Shea. And O'Shea said, yeah, that sounds like Toschi. He's useless as a cop, but he's really good at getting himself in the paper. And that's what led to the whole investigation of Toschi's letter writing, is that so he admitted to the letters to Mopin, pretending to be young women talking about how great he was. He said it was fun for his family, that's what he said. And so the dude spends the 70s just hyping. He's his own hype man. He's like his own press agent. He's just using the newspaper. He's planting stories, then writing letters into the newspaper praising himself by name, and it's always by name. So if you see a Zodiac letter that's like says anything about Toschi or how great the cops are, like he's in the letter he says that city cop Toschi is good, but I'm better. It's like, why would the Zodiac say that? Like it's more Toschi fan fiction absurdity, and that's the movie I want to see. I want to see a movie like, I don't know who would be good in it, like a comedic actor playing Toschi, writing all of these fake letters about himself and sort of being responsible for this big unsolved case, but instead of devoting all of your efforts to solving this case and getting justice for the victims and their families, you're using it to promote yourself. So, you become Dirty Harry, and you become, Mark Ruffalo plays you in a movie, and you become friends with the mayor, and yeah. That's a dark movie. That's a darker movie than Fincher's movie.
Oh, yeah. I mean, maybe Liam Neeson, after the recent Naked Gun movie, maybe he could pull it off or something.
Oh, that'd be so, because he could be brooding in it too,
Yeah, like he could play the serious part and then also like the goofy ass guy just like writing letters about himself.
It's so out of, and this is like, I had to write a book because I'm thinking there's I've read so many Zodiac books. Like, I'm not a completist. I don't think I've read them all, but I've read as many as I can get my hands on. And nobody talks about this. Nobody talks about this at all. It's like finding out that Batman was faking, notes from the Riddler, and you're just like, oh, this is, and it ruins the whole story. So I understand why other people don't include it in their work or gloss over it.
Yeah, he like created burner accounts before social media. Really.
Imagine he'd be a menace right now. Imagine what this guy would do. Imagine what this guy would be doing now.
20 different David Toschi accounts where he's just commenting on his own posts, like, kick his ass.
And commenting his own, and that's something you see in the Zodiac online community. A lot of people create burner accounts, congratulating themselves.
I've heard about.
Yeah,
There's one guy that comes to mind, and I think you were briefly referencing him earlier about the connecting the Black Dahlia. I don't know if you want to, say his name, but I was having a good laugh. I saw a video of his the other day, or it was like a takedown video where this guy was pointing out all of the things wrong with his idea about the Black Dahlia Zodiac connection. And it's Alex Baber, but it's this guy. He goes on and he's immediately like, I have a 160 IQ and I read books backwards and all this shit. And I was like, okay, how would anyone take this serious?
I don't. And he just got like a 4-page spread in a UK paper about this this ridiculous connection, and season 2 is coming out. But yeah, the takedown videos and the guy who did the takedown videos, I don't know him personally, but I know his work, and he's actually one of the people who helped solve one of the Zodiac ciphers after 50, years. He's very legitimate. I don't know him personally. I've interacted with him on message boards. I don't know him. His work is solid, and I think it really bothered him that this guy was, so fraudulent about his cryptography, and but this guy has 1 million burner accounts, so like if the story shows up on Reddit, there's a whole bunch of enthusiastic people who never post on the subreddit talking about Alex Baber really did it. It's very Tosky-esque, it's
Tosky 2.0, really.
And there's other lesser known Zodiac experts who also have burner accounts that post in the exact same weird style as them, that are there backing up their claims to certain things. And those people aren't even fraudulent people. Those are pretty good researchers, but they also can't resist having the burner account. I've seen it a lot. Like I'm not a genius. I don't have a 160 IQ, but I can tell when somebody has a distinctive writing style and another account is just writing in the exact same style as that person. So it's kind of a goofy thing. I don't have any burner accounts. I might be more successful and might probably sell more books if I did have burner accounts that were backing my claims up. I don't know. Maybe Hulu would stick me on a podcast. I don't know what would happen if I had burner accounts, but maybe I should look into it.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know. I'm thinking about trying to get Alex Baber on here and talking to him, but showing up with, have you ever seen the movie This Island Earth?
No, I haven't.
It's like a sci-fi movie. The guys have giant brains. They're like aliens with giant brains. I thought about making a giant brain and showing up and just claiming to have a 300 IQ and just...
Well, his suspect has changed too. I think like almost 18 years ago or something like that. He was going around saying that Zodiac was someone else, and that this person had called his house and was like, "You got me," I mean, you get a lot of these types in this community. So like, I want to be a truth teller, because this is like, I feel like it's a circus of charlatans. And that's a lot of true crime. That's not all true crime, but that's a lot of true crime. And I want to be a counterbalance to that. So my story is not as exciting on the surface, but I think a lot of people said that they read the book in a very short amount of time, because they were just like, I can't believe that I didn't know this, and I can't believe, I want to know what comes next. I think it's a compelling story, but it's not a blockbuster film story. It's more of a, let's get into the details and show what's actually documented in real life versus Zodiac lore. Yeah. Which is a great sell, and I would read my book, but the Graysmith book is very compelling. I read it when I was a teenager, and it's fantastic. He did a great job with it.
I would want both. Like, I like the true crime side of it that gets a little off the rails, but I always want the facts in there as well. Like, I wanted this as a counterpiece when I first got into the Zodiac, because I just knew, like, this can't be the cut and dry of it. This can't be like the boring, like real life stuff of it, because it's just too fantastic. And I think my first like introduction into that was the Netflix Making a Murderer. I think that was the first time.
Yeah, the Stephen Avery, that one.
Yes, I think that was the first time I realized, because I got sucked into that, and I was like, they need to get this fucking guy out of jail.
Yeah.
And then like one Google search after I got done watching it was like, nah, he did it. And you're just like, oh,
yeah,
really?
I was like, oh, this kid just wants to go to wrestling. Like they offered up like wrestling tickets. I'm like I felt bad for the kid, and then and that's a lot of true crime documentaries leave out large chunks of information on purpose.
Yeah.
And then you have to sort of deep dive into, I was just watching one about a Netflix documentary about a girl who had crashed her car into a house and killed her boyfriend and a passenger. Yes. And it was like, it was sort of up in the air whether she did it or didn't do it. And she, but then I did some reading on it, and it's like, no, she did it. It's like everybody knows, there's a lot of stuff like that going around. And I think, with this, it's Tosky, like, people will argue all day that Tosky was exonerated by the police department. But the police department doesn't have a great history of investigating their own officers.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the chief of the department then tells the FBI, and the FBI takes the Tosky associated letter out of the Zodiac profile. Like, they know it's a fraud. They know, like, this is real information in the real FBI file, and there's some really good information in there. But I understand that, like, it's a real boring read, so I tried to distill some of that and stick it into my, in my book in a narrative way, and I tried to be a little funny about it, because this is serious stuff, and this is kind of dark stuff, but there's an absurdity to the whole thing of people sort of using this case as a launching pad for their celebrity.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's one of those where it can get really twisted really quick because it was so long ago, and there's this really concrete foundation that's been made for it, where it's like, yeah, you can take this and spin it any way you want, really. I mean,
and there's two survivors still alive that were, one was stabbed by Zodiac and one was stabbed and one was shot by Zodiac. Another, like, pertinent thing in the woman who was murdered, Darlene Ferrin, she had a stalker, George Waters. I talk about him a lot in the book. He broke into her house. He threatened to rape her. He supposedly bragged about killing her at a strip club. He has a really half-assed alibi for where he was on the 4th of July. This guy's out partying every night of the week at strip clubs, at bars, showing up at her job. On the 4th of July, he claims to be asleep in bed by 11 p.m. with his wife. And his wife is the only person to back this up. And the wife didn't even know that this was a murder case. She thought this was about a previous restraining order he had for beating up his ex-wife. So she was like, she doesn't even know what she's telling the cops. She's just backing him up. So he's a real, live wire of a suspect. There's also a cop that she was dating who 2 years later, his girlfriend shot herself with his .357 in a room feet away from her kids. And the original investigator, the No Country for Old Men guy, declares it a suicide and lets his cop get off on it. And there's a third cop who gets fired for a sexual encounter with a 15-year-old. He beats up a woman and 2 years later beats up a woman and shoots a man. All three of these guys had a relationship with this woman who was killed.
Wow.
And none of them were her husbands. She's married with a kid, and she's having 3 affairs, if not more, at the time. So there are real suspects in this case. It's not the boogeyman. It's, chances are in real life, women are killed by someone they know, likely a former or current intimate partner. It's very, very rare for a woman to be murdered by a stranger. Also, if a woman has a stalker, it's an over 80% chance that stalker, who's always a man, will physically harm her. So, if there's a stalker involved in any of this, that's the first person you have to look at. And did they know that in 1969? Probably not. By the way that they sort of go on strike and then stop looking at this stalker, who's a fantastic suspect.
Yeah, after Darlene was murdered, I mean, that's when the first letter was written.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was maybe almost a month later. It was she was murdered on July 4th, and the first letters, the 3-part cipher, so 1 letter to 3 newspapers with 3 parts of the cryptogram, were sent on July 31st.
So do you think her murderer was the one that wrote the first Zodiac letter then?
I do. I absolutely do. I think her murderer understood a lot about police investigations. I think he was forensically aware. I think he sent the letters to sort of thwart any possible investigation. I think he also knew that the guys who did the Lake Herman Road murder were locked up already. They were already in jail for a different murder. I think it's somebody who's definitely somehow adjacent to the police world. Darlene's stalker was the events bartender at the Elks Lodge where all these cops hung out.
Okay.
He was the bartender of basically all of these guys. So, could that information have been, loose lips after a couple of beers at the bar? Yeah, absolutely. But also, and speaking of forensically aware, the cop she was dating, who the woman shot herself 2 years later at his place, he was the evidence officer for Solano County. So he's the fingerprint guy, he's the crime scene guy, he's a photographer. He has photos of Darlene and other Zodiac victims in his house, and he would know about forensics. He would know about police investigations. So, and that's just right off the bat. That's not even talking about her scary ex-husband, that they don't even talk to until 1970. So this murder happens. This is how concerned they were about this murder. It happens on July 4th of 69, and I think anyone who's ever expressed any interest in true crime, you look at the husband, you look at the boyfriend, you look at the ex. It takes them 7 months to look at the ex.
Man.
So, that's how hard they were working this case.
Yeah, that sounds pretty rough there. If they're not even looking at the closest people involved, especially, I mean, not saying that it happens every time, but the fact that she's having multiple affairs and the husband is not even being talked to, it's kind of like,
the husband was at work. The current husband was at work, but the ex-husband, who was like sort of like a violent ex, and he was like a military guy, and he was in the brig, and he was in a mental hospital, and like he ticks a lot of Zodiac boxes, and they don't talk to that guy for 7 months.
Okay, and, my bad. I was mixing.
They should have. The husband was he was a restaurant cook, and he was cooking 4th of July. He worked late that night, so he was actually he has a pretty airtight alibi. He was at work, and he was coming home. He came home and drove the babysitters home. And she was always late, so he figured, all right, she's just late for the party they were supposed to have.
Yeah.
And so he didn't find. Then the cops came to the house, and they were like, oh, it's a bad. So he was distraught. So yeah, the husband checks out, but the ex and the boyfriend's a couple of messes going on there.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was my bad. I remember that now. I got those two mixed up. I was thinking husband was the ex-husband. Yeah.
Well, he was the one-time husband.
Yeah.
Recent ex. Yeah.
Right. I got you there. Okay, so then with the Lake Berryessa stabbing, that was after the 408 cipher was solved. That's Cecilia Shepard and Brian Hartnell.
Yeah.
With that one, so I guess with all these being kind of tied with just the letters and stuff like that, what do you think happened there? Because I feel like that's the most infamous one where you said you get the guy with the executioner hood. He, comes up in the middle of the day at this campsite or picnic site or whatever.
Picnic site by a lake. It's a man-made lake, and it's a picnic site, and they're just like sitting on a blanket talking, and Cecilia sees him coming from the distance, and he's not wearing his mask at first, and Brian's just like, oh, he's probably just looking for a place to pee, and she's like, then he eventually puts a mask on, and he's got a gun, and he comes over with the gun, and starts having dialogue with the kid. He's telling them that he escaped from prison in Colorado or Montana, and he just needs Brian's car to get to Mexico, and he wants to escape. Brian throws the car keys. He's totally compliant. He's actually overly compliant. He's like, I'm a student, and I'll write you a check because I don't have any cash to give you, but will you take a check? And he's like asking the guy a lot of questions, like he's a sociologist, and this goes on for I think Brian estimated it goes on for 15 minutes. He's in the process of talking with this killer, and he asks if the gun is loaded, because he's read stories in Reader's Digest that the gun isn't loaded sometimes, and the guy shows him it's a loaded gun, and then they he has them tied up and stabs them both pretty brutally. Brian plays dead. He's smart. He plays dead. The guy leaves thinking both kids are dead, and he goes and writes on Brian's car. So instead of writing a letter to the newspaper, he draws the Zodiac symbol on the door of Brian's car, writes the dates of the first two Zodiac attacks, and then puts this 6:30 at the time when it happened, and then drives 27 miles and calls the Napa police and says, I committed a double murder, and gave location as to where it was. Yeah, it's similar to the other Zodiac crimes, but it's also similar to, and you have to remember, this is the time of the Tate LaBianca murders. The Manson murders were just in the news at this time, and that involves a lot of scrawling on the wall, writing political piggies, pigs, this and that. So now there's an evolution where the Zodiac is now wearing a spooky hood, like an executioner's hood, and he's now writing on car doors. There's definitely some overlap with the Manson, with the Tate LaBianca murders happening. It seems to me that this is a copycat, because he gets a lot of things wrong that the Zodiac did. As far as we know, that we know for certain at the Blue Rock Springs thing that the guy wasn't wearing a costume. And this is a very heavy man. They did compaction tests based on his boot print, and the police determined that this was a 240-pound man. So in 1969, a 240-pound man is absolutely massive. George Foreman is considered a gigantic heavyweight boxer, and he's about 227. Muhammad Ali is like 218. An NFL lineman is about 250. This guy's 240. So he's a huge guy. Back then, the average man was 5'8" and 166 pounds. So he's almost 90 pounds heavier than the average man, 80 pounds heavier than the average man. So that sort of rules out a lot of people who earlier in the case, could have been Zodiac. And then I was speaking with one of Fincher's researchers, who's an excellent guy, and he was doing a lot of research on the movie. And the police had also determined there was a car with a small wheelbase at the time with mismatched front tires. And the police went around asking at gas stations, have you seen any customers who had a big guy with a little car with mismatched tires? And one of the gas station owners says, well, not customers, but my former employee is a really big guy with a beat up VW Beetle. His name is Arthur. And that's the suspect from the movie, from the Graysmith book, and that's how they first get onto him. And Vallejo sends a detective to interview Arthur Lee Allen, and he takes one look at him and says, this is an overweight, bald, middle-aged man. This can't be the guy, because this is a Vallejo detective, so he's looking for a 25 to 30-year-old, curly, blonde-haired, husky guy. And he sees this middle-aged, overweight man and says, I can't be him. And he doesn't even follow up on if he's wearing wing walker boots, if he has, he treats him as a non-suspect. And that could have been, we're still getting documentaries about Arthur Lee Allen. The latest Netflix one is about him. This could have been either he could have been cleared in '69, or he could have been a hell of a suspect for the Lake Herman Road murder. I think he's a very good suspect for that murder alone, but not for the Zodiac serial. I think, Lee Allen and Lake Berryessa, they talked to him a couple of days after it, and Sergeant Lynch, the guy who did it, just blew it. He wasn't inquisitive at all. And it took 2 years later when when the Zodiac Task Force in '71, they interview Allen again, and he's had 2 years now. He has a 2 year. If he has anything to do with this, he's had a 2 year lead.
Man,
it's unfortunate, and that's the great scene in the movie where he's wearing the Zodiac watch, and
yes.
that's all real. He really did volunteer information that the bloody knives in my car, that's because I ate a chicken for dinner and killed it, and it would have been nice if the first detective did his job, and they could have been sort of vetting this guy properly in '69 rather than '71 when. If they're serving a search warrant in '71, '72, he's had time to dispose of, if he thinks the cops are onto him, he's had time now. So, so that's a tough one. That's a tough break in the case. It's more than just one thing, because this guy certainly isn't the guy, the 25-year-old with curly blondish hair. So it's, or the 45-year-old guy with a crew cut, he's none of those guys. He's a big 6 foot, 250-pound bald man, and not to be confused with any of the other eyewitness accounts. So we're looking at different people, and a lot of people in the Zodiac sort of online community will say that the descriptions match, and they'll argue that, and I have to push back on that every time, because the descriptions do not match. There's actually no match at all, other than it's each of them had a varying degree of heavyset white male.
That was something I thought was really interesting with that, because when I started getting into your book, I went back and I listened to the first Zodiac thing I listened to probably 3 or 4 years ago. And that was something that stood out right away, was that when they're going through these murders and they're talking about eyewitnesses, it's always a different description. And they just kind of go right by it, where they're just they said this guy looked like this. And then anyway, and it's just kind of
it's a huge deal. In real life, it's a huge deal. Yeah. To the real cops, it's a huge deal. To, the true crime industry, it's an inconvenience.
Yeah.
And, that's one of the problems. And, other problems are that the letters are authenticated by one person, and that person was proven to be wrong with the Toschi hoax letter. He was saying it's Zodiac, it's 100% Zodiac, and they brought in 3 outside experts, which, police departments don't love to do, bring in outside experts. They brought in 3 outside experts who were like, no, this is a fake. He was wrong on that. He said the Riverside writing for the Sherry Joe Bates case, which is not a non-canonical Zodiac case, he said that was the same author as Zodiac. Riverside police and the FBI are like, this is not Zodiac. The Riverside police have said it 7 times publicly. The FBI said it 3 times publicly, but no one calls this out, like this BS handwriting analysis. Again, that's another inconvenient thing in this case, that like the thing that links the whole case together is one man's opinion. He was untrained. His dad created the job for himself and then gave it to his son. His son did no professional extending education. He didn't keep up with the science of handwriting analysis, as much of a science as handwriting analysis is considered. And, and that's the guy who ties this all together. This isn't tied together with DNA. This isn't tied together with the fingerprint. This is goofy letters sent in a newspaper and one handwriting expert saying that, oh yeah, the same guy wrote these. And that's it. And that's what ties this entire thing together.
That's so wild. Especially the more the letters start coming in, the more unhinged they get, and just the more like almost silly they start to get. And every time he's up in his kill count by like 10 people, and it's like, okay, how could you?
Yeah, he's up to 37.
Yeah.
And he's doing reviews of movies. He's like, The Exorcist was my favorite satirical comedy of the year, and like this has nothing to do with the original letters that were like, I am the killer of this person. I did this, and this to prove it. I will state some information. Like it was very just the facts in the beginning, and then he made some threats. He threatened to go on a kill rampage. He threatened to blow up school buses, pick off kids off school buses. He threatened to set off bombs. He did those in the original letters, but then later it's just like, Tosky's a good cop, but I'm better, and it's everybody should wear a Zodiac button.
Yeah.
He wanted him to wear the symbol on it as a button. And he writes about that 3 or 4 times to the newspaper. And you're like, this isn't the same. If you read 2 different authors, you can tell the author's voice, and the lack of skepticism about these Zodiac letters it's absolutely shocking.
Yeah, it's unreal. The first 3 or 4 letters are really spooky, especially like with the ciphers and everything too. Almost gives the illusion, and I don't know anything about ciphers. It does give the idea that like you're dealing with like a mastermind here. So I could see where like people kind of got swept away with like there's these like decoded messages that we have to figure out like who this guy is and who he's going to kill next and all this stuff. It is very like comic bookish.
It is. It's also a great way to get people to buy the paper, because he's like, my name is in the cipher. So of course they printed it. Like the 3 newspapers, they had a decision to make whether they print this or not. It's almost interactive where people at home. It was two school teachers from Salinas, California, that solved the first cipher, the 3-part cipher. And it does seem a little gimmicky and interactive in the beginning, but it is scary. And I know nothing about ciphers either. When I first heard about this, I was like, oh man, this guy must have some really crazy master plan that's like out there in plain sight. And the letters are just like, I will collect slaves in paradise.
Yeah.
And you're just like, what a goof. Killing someone is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. And you're like, come on, and that's his.
Oh, so he probably just bought Idiot's Guide for Ciphers or something, was just like, hell yeah. But it's like, he has no real message.
The message, you would have to believe he believed this, and people do believe that, and that, people believe anything. People believe that, the mall Santa is Santa, the real Santa's helper. People believe that. But, they're usually children, and, adults, you kind of know at a certain point that something funny's going on. But, that's where we are with this. It's like a goofy Batman. It's a goofy Riddler. And, there's no good messages. And the one they deciphered in 2020, it's more of the same. It's more like, that wasn't me that called on TV. Yeah. And don't try to prevent me from getting slaves in paradise. And you're like, this back with this shit again.
Yeah, here we go. Well... Yeah, it is like, it's a big mess really when you get into it.
Yeah, it is. It's and if you want to read about a big mess, man, I go into it. In this book, it's really just like I lay out the whole mess. I don't try to sugarcoat anything in this case. Like, it's a disaster. It's still a disaster because, these problems haven't been rectified. And, here we are, 56, 57 years later. These are not problems that have been rectified. No police department has made an announcement like, all right, listen, these first 2 murders, they weren't really Zodiac, and I'm sorry, to the family members. And, San Francisco isn't like, all right, look, our guy that we put in charge of this, he used this as a platform to become famous, and I'm sorry we didn't solve the murder of Paul Stein because our detective was too busy writing letters praising himself to the paper. So they haven't done that, and I don't think they will. And there's no closure at all. Like, not only is there no justice, but like these departments know that some garbage happened in this case, that they haven't come out and said, look, full disclosure, this was nonsense, Yeah. And it would be nice if they did.
Yeah, yeah, and we talked about the Paul Stein thing a little bit, the Paul Stein murder, and that pretty well sounds like a cab robbery, like a typical cab robbery. But then you have the letter that mails in the piece of his bloody shirt,
Yeah.
and that kind of like throws a wrench into all that, because it's like, well, they're just going to be looking at the Zodiac for his murder.
And there's a serial cab robber operating in that neighborhood. He moves to San Francisco from Oregon like September 29th. On October 1st, 2 cab drivers are robbed and put in the trunk of their cars. On October 11th, Paul Stein is robbed, also different from the Zodiac victims, and killed. Other cab attacks happen in January of 1970. Also in Presidio Heights, another cab driver named Charles Jarman is robbed and shot in the head. Toschi gets the case. Toschi gets a fingerprint right away. Toschi arrests the guy who did it in January of 1970. And the serial gunpoint cab robber that resulted in 2 murders, the spree stops as soon as this guy is arrested. There's no more of these Presidio Heights cab killings or gunpoint cab robberies as soon as Toschi arrests this guy. And it was a remarkable bit of police work Toschi did. He did it all in one day, too. He found the print in the guy's pocket on a letter, took it to the Hall of Justice, got them to manually match it to a drug arrest. They brought the guy in for questioning. Toschi questioned him, got a confession, and then when it went to trial, the guy pled guilty. So, it was a remarkable bit of police work by Dave Toschi. That same energy was not there for Paul Stein. He never interviewed the witnesses. He didn't send a real sketch artist to get a sketch. He sent a cop named Juan Morales who could draw a little bit, but he wasn't a trained sketch artist. There's a lot of things that Toschi could have done with the Paul Stein case that he didn't do, but he did a remarkable job with the Jarman case, and so he was capable of it. Like, it shows you that Toschi, when properly motivated, was a very good detective.
Yeah. That is one thing that I guess kind of does get lost when you get into him writing the letters about himself and stuff like that. He still is, a good detective, and probably a good reason why, if Dirty Harry and Bullet were references to him, it's, that's a pretty big.
He was major. He was a homicide guy for a long time, and there's over 100 homicide cases that led to convictions based on Toschi's investigation or testimony. So that's important, and that's really important to keep in mind, because if the department did come out and say Dave Toschi wrote a couple of these Zodiac letters, that's him faking evidence. So all of those people, 100 murder cases, have been in prison, or they could start appealing. They could start suing the city, because now this guy is a known evidence inventor, or, he's dirty, so then the guy who put them away is dirty. The actual serial cab killer could have appealed the case and saying that, this guy's, along with 99 other people, they could have sued the city for millions of dollars, he would have been a pariah. And, the police commissioner's number one job is to make the mayor look good. It's not to be a good cop. It's to not have the city sued for millions and, potentially let dozens or multiple dozens of people out of prison based on an evidence faker in your department.
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of pressure. It's when you think about a guy that might have like an attention seeking or like a fame seeking side of himself that has all this, pressure to do right by the mayor, and one little thing like that could put a stain on all of it. It's pretty hard to imagine.
And, his chief also, Toschi's boss, his chief, when he was exonerating him for writing the Zodiac letters, in the same breath says that Toschi is a disturbed personality because of his unyielding need for attention and publicity. So the guy is supposed to be saying Toschi's all right, and he's still burying him. He's still mad at him. It's not good.
No, that's not good. And similarly, going back to the ciphers, the Zodiac must have had, or whoever is writing the Zodiac letters, they must have had a pretty marketing wise brain. You know what I mean? How would you not pay attention to that sort of thing?
I mean, really great at branding. I don't even know if branding was a term back then, but he was really good at branding, because the Vallejo Times-Herald got a bunch of letters from Dave McGrath's friends, who we were talking about before, saying that they were going to kill the witness in his case and all this, but none of those got printed in the newspaper. The Vallejo Times-Herald just handed those to the cops. Had Dave McGrath's friends thought to put a cipher and come up with a symbol, maybe those letters would have been printed in the paper. It's probably as simple as that, because I think that's what makes it different. Newspapers weren't really in the business of printing threats in letters, but the cipher made it compelling.
the idea of printing is so outdated now that it's hard to imagine messages not instantly being there too. That's kind of another thing. Like when you go back and start getting into this, where it's like something really would have to grab you to be like, this is going out on tomorrow's paper instead of like, this looks cool, I'm going to put it on the internet right now. Like,
yeah, exactly. Like it's a measured decision, right? It's a very purposeful decision. There's no reposting, right? You don't get to just repost it or just, cut and paste something. They have to make a decision what pages the thing is going to be on, how much, and they took these jobs very seriously. The publishers and of newspapers thought of themselves as the establishment, and they are the people who give, who inform the public. They at least believe that about themselves. Whether we believe that about them or not, that's besides the point. But they were of the belief that they were an American institution, and what they were doing is very serious. And what's interesting too, and the FBI was willing to be the lead investigator on Zodiac, which would have been, they would have solved this case if the newspapers agreed to press charges for an extortion case, because the Zodiac was threatening to murder people if they didn't print it in the paper. So the FBI said that this qualifies as extortion, so we can take over the case and we'll get this guy. So the Vallejo paper said fine, we agree, we're with you on this. Both San Francisco papers said no, so the FBI could not investigate the case, and the Zodiac stopped writing to the Vallejo paper after so this person understands investigations. He wants the local guys in different jurisdictions investigating him. He doesn't want the FBI looking at him, this letter writer. There's a knowledge of police tactics. The letters after the Paulstein murder, he is commenting on which police units came. So like motorcycle units had come, and canine units had come, and the fire department sent the spotlight. And the Zodiac, instead of running away from a crime scene, is sitting there, I guess, jotting down which police units showed up and why that was ineffective in catching him. So it's almost like he's talking about the tactics the police used in a negative way. And I don't know what civilian would lock onto that. What average person who's not a police buff or has no background in that would even make note of that? If you just had killed someone, you would imagine you were fleeing the scene as quickly as possible, not sitting around looking at which specialized units are showing up and why that's ineffective.
Yeah, it does kind of point towards someone that's close to at least like the police side of things, or has some sort of background in that, or is familiar in something
way. Like that. I think. Yeah, I think there's it's a thread through the 1969 letters for sure. Is that there's a law enforcement, there's an understanding of law enforcement things, phrasing, and sort of evaluating tactics, and it just like I think I say in the book, like there's like an undercover and the guy has like like a short haircut and a mustache, and you're like, oh, that dude's a cop. Mm-hmm. Like that's how I look at these 69 letters. I'm like, oh, that dude's a cop. It's too many things that point in that direction.
Yeah, I agree. It does read very cop-like. Yeah. I appreciate you writing this book. It's something I've been wanting to get into, like the details like this for a long time. So it's great that it's all packaged in like one easy to read, novel here, or I guess, I don't know if you'd call it a novel or what.
I guess just like a nonfiction.
Nonfiction, yeah.
I don't know what to call it. Yeah, just that. Yeah, I don't want to call it true crime because but yeah, I guess it's a history. It's a sort of true crime history of the Zodiac era and the case and the reality versus it's kind of a debunking of the Zodiac.
Yeah, and I like that it does touch on what was going on during that time outside of this as well. The hippie stuff, the 60s, everything like that. I love the first chapter. Everything about the 60s is bullshit. That whole thing, I think it even kind of goes into like how the Manson family was kind of affecting that era as well. And
it's and they're contemporaries, so like there's definitely there's competition between San Francisco and Los Angeles there, and and the Manson story too is you look at some of that stuff. I mean Manson's a bad dude. Manson was a pimp. Manson was very controlling and abusive to these women. But was Manson really trying to start a race war?
Right.
Was some of these more outrageous claims are people bought it in the jury, and people bought it in Vincent Pugosi's book, but is that what he really wanted? Right. Or is this some drug bullshit,
Yeah. I got the Chaos book when it came out too, and that was that whole, I love that side of I guess just crime in general. Like if you're getting into true crime, I feel like you have to find that other side where it's like kind of have to read between the lines a little bit and see what was really going on around those times.
That's an exciting book. Chaos is his access is unbelievable. The people he had access to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would liken this book to that, where it just feels very similar. As like,
thank you.
Yeah, where you're kind of cutting through a lot of the bullshit, just getting straight to like these are the facts. Do you plan on doing any other books like this that are related to true crime that are really diving into the maybe some of the details that were missed?
It depends on what I find out. But I am very interested, and I have been for most of my life, in the West Memphis 3 case.
Yeah, that's a great one. Yeah, I would love that.
I've been interested in that case for a very long time. There's been zero justice in that case.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot of stories. The documentaries were excellent, but they were advocacy documentaries, and I don't think they told the full story. And I would like to get to the bottom of that. I think it would be incredibly sad, and I think it would be sort of really hard to do, difficult to do as a researcher, but difficult to deal with because it's children that were murdered. But I think there's something about that really just bothers me. It stuck with me for a long time. And, I think I would like to know who the hell did that, or figure out what the hell was really going on there.
That is one it's very compelling. That one, it broke my heart when I first got into it, because I'd only heard the thing about the 3 guys that were, put in prison and then let out on the the stipulation or whatever that it was. But when I actually
the Alfred plea,
the Alfred plea, when I actually got into it and realized that it's about 3 little kids that got like brutally murdered, it's like, oh my god, like this is dark.
The reason I got into it was I was also a teenage metalhead in the 90s. I was into punk and metal and hardcore, and so I felt like these 3 dudes were persecuted because they dressed in all black and like listened to Metallica or whatever. The trial shows that that they used that stuff against them, and they were sort of outsiders in their town. And also like you, then the reality of what happened in the case hits you, and you're like, it's awful what happened to those 3 guys that went to prison with a lousy trial, but what happened to those kids is unbelievable, and that person is still out there. Whoever did it is either dead or still out there.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. And the satanic panic angle of it with them. That is really, it's an interesting one for sure. Like it's right up there with like the Zodiac story or Black Dahlia or any of those that'll just like grab you once you get into it.
And I would like to do something, because I think the other books were just very much advocating for the West Memphis 3.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to sort of do it. It's not just that. It's where it's also, besides advocacy, it's also, I want to get to the unvarnished truth. Whatever the truth of this is, get to it.
Yeah, that would be really interesting. Hopefully you do. That would be great. I would love to read that one as well.
It'll take me about 3 years, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say
maybe 5. Maybe 5.
Yeah, I'm sure that can't be easy getting into all this. Like with the Zodiac stuff, where did you even begin, really?
I started with the records, the available records. So, and then I started writing to making FOIA requests for old reports, and that's difficult. A lot of them are gone. Or I got some court records about Dave McGrath for his first trial, like 1,500 pages there. I started looking up names in the paper of people who were involved in similar crimes, cold calling them, emailing them, finding them on LinkedIn, finding them on Ancestry, finding them on Facebook, talking to them. So some of these people were really helpful. Some of the people who were like involved in the North Bay criminal underground of the time.
Yeah.
And family members of the people who were super helpful to me. I called them. I said, I'm a writer. I'm working on this thing about, crime in the North Bay, and it might be somehow involving Zodiac. And they're like, well, I've been waiting 57 years to tell my story about Zodiac. And that happened so many times.
Wow.
That, there are so many women in the Bay Area who were on a date with a man in 1969, 70, 71, and the guy claimed to be the Zodiac, when they were sort of wrapping the date up, and we're like, all right, I'm gonna go home now, and the guy's like, but I'm the Zodiac. And, just like I heard that story from multiple women. That's not actual real information that I used for the book, but that's just, just at the time how pervasive this Zodiac thing was over the culture. So it's like these teenage girls are going on a date, and the guy's like, you better put out, or else, because I'm the Zodiac. And like, yeah, you motherfucker. They remember these dudes' names too.
I'm
so
sure.
like, yeah, so it's like I know the guy who pretended to be the Zodiac in 1969 and what he's doing now. You know,
that's fucked up. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm sure that would like stick with you, where you're like, oh shit, this guy's claiming to be a serial killer. It turns out to be this like, you know, long-lasting, reputable like serial killer story.
And like one of the women was a criminal. She was totally a member of the criminal underground at the time, and she would never go to the cops for anything. But she's like, look, man, this guy from the Air Force Base, you know, he got all weird and said he was the Zodiac, and take a look at this. And you know, they I don't think they did, but she you know, she felt that strongly about it.
It's hard to believe, but then I mean, even on that live TV show, that's the famous clip where the person calls in from the mental hospital and claims to be the Zodiac. It's like, if you get into true crime, you learn pretty fast that people will take credit for the craziest shit, and it's like, why would you want to? You know, if you're going to get looked into and everything else, it's nuts to me.
Yeah, I'll never be able to figure that out.
No, I usually do like book and movie reviews and whatnot.
Okay.
So I was curious, like, could you give me some of your favorite movies? It doesn't have to be like your top, but what are some movies you're into?
Well, recent or all time?
Let's do recent and then do all time.
Okay, so recent, I really like Backrooms. I like Obsession. I like Exit 8. I'm a horror watcher for sure.
Nice.
I liked Weapons, Sinners, you know, Hereditary. All time. I mean, I love Shutter Island. I'm sort of obsessed with Shutter Island. Because on every subsequent watch, like the first time you watch it, like, oh, it's a good movie, and then I watched it I was like on a 19-hour flight to Singapore, and I watched Shutter Island again, and I was like, man, Scorsese really earns every twist in the movie when you watch it knowing the twist. So that, I guess, like Memento, I do like twisty type movies. I like some absurd movies like Steven Seagal's Out for Justice.
Yeah.
I grew up in Brooklyn. They filmed it right near my high school when I was in high school, and it's
awesome.
It's such a bad movie, and it's so amazing. And I think like the mafia shook him down while they were making that movie. So just like the lore of that movie, I like some documentaries like Decline of Western Civilization 2: The Metal Years. It's about like just the LA glam scene, and that's like a happy movie for me. I just just invite people over and watch that. So I like. You know, I like thrillers, horror. You know, I mean, I like gangster movies too. The Wrestler, Mickey Rourke's The Wrestler.
Oh, yeah.
It's
a classic.
Fucking
movie.
Amazing. Yeah, that's so good. You know, so yeah, but it changes all the time. You know, I guess I never have a top 10 that's a consistent top 10. You know,
I can understand that. Yeah, I feel like it kind of always has to shift around. For me, yeah, it's like my favorite movie will change depending on when I watch a movie, next time I watch a movie, you know, so on and so forth, where I feel like it's always rotating.
And then there's the thing where you like rewatch something and you're like, well, this was one of my favorite movies, but I don't think it holds up. Or, you know, sometimes it's the rarer. It's like, wow, this is better than I remember. The early Guy Ritchie movies, I was shocked at how I mean, they're very much of a time and they're very much of a style. But man, they, you know, Snatch and Lock, Stock, they really hold up, you know, all these years later.
Yeah, those are ones I need to go back and rewatch. That's something I have been doing too and noticing a lot is that like I've been going and watching a lot of the horror movies I watched when I was a kid. Like I kind of started, you know, watching horror movies young when I was like 6 and on and stuff like that. Yeah. My mom was into Stephen King, so we were always watching Stephen King movies and shit. And like now that I'm going back and watching it, I remember them being worse a lot of times than they are now. And like I feel like now when I watch them, I'm like, oh, that's actually pretty decent. Like even if it has some goofy moments, like they're pretty solid movies.
Yeah, I think that happens with a lot of early horror. I think like newer horror, at least in the last like say 15 years or so, is more serious throughout. And I think there's much more in the 80s and 90s horror. 70s was pretty serious too, but the 80s and 90s they try to make some levity in there. Like Freddy Krueger is, you know, he's like a 50s comedian. He's cracking bad jokes, and like I think it makes it more, you know, more watchable or something like that, where it's not just like the vibe isn't just like it follows. It's just a heavy vibe the entire time. Yeah. Whereas Freddy Krueger is like he's got one-liners, you know, and it's and there's something terribly cheesy about it, but there's something very endearing about it. And I appreciate it as an adult more than I did when I was a kid, maybe.
Yeah, I can see that. You get the MTV Freddy, and things really start to go off the rails. It's a lot of fun. Well, I think that wraps it up. So thank you so much, Eddie, for coming on. Where can people buy your book?
You can buy it on Amazon or where you normally buy books, but Amazon's fine with me. If you can order it at your library, if you want to go to your public library, just request a copy. That'd be cool. You can find me on Instagram at Eddie McNamara NYC, and if you read the book and you want to talk Zodiac with me, please feel free. I really do enjoy these conversations, so I can talk about this all day.
Right on. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.